The rain battered the windows of the corner brew cafe, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo the tension inside. The small, cozy establishment, tucked away on a quiet street in the heart of the city, was usually a haven of warmth and laughter, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft hum of conversation. But tonight, the air was thick with unease, the kind that settles like fog when someone powerful and cruel holds court. At the center of it all sat Victor Hargrove, the millionaire whose name alone could silence a room. His sharp suit and sharper tongue commanded attention, but not the kind born of respect. It was fear, pure and simple. Every server, every regular, every fleeting customer knew to tiptoe around him, to shrink under his cold, appraising stare. Until she walked in. Clara, the new waitress, with her unassuming braid and eyes that held a quiet fire, didn't know the rules. And when she stood up to him, in front of everyone, the cafe would never be the same. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of standing up for what's right, please hit that like button, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that inspire and uplift. Let's spread the light together. The Corner Brew Cafe had been a fixture in the neighborhood for decades, its faded wooden sign and mismatched chairs a testament to its enduring charm. It was the kind of place where people came to escape, students hunched over laptops, retirees sharing stories over steaming mugs, and young couples stealing glances across wobbly tables. The walls were lined with local art, and the counter was cluttered with jars of homemade cookies, each one baked by the owner, Marla, whose warm smile was the heartbeat of the place. But for all its coziness, the cafe had a shadow, Victor Hargrove. He wasn't a regular in the traditional sense, showing up only when it suited him, but his presence was a storm cloud. Victor, with his tailored suits and slicked back hair, was a real estate tycoon who owned half the buildings on the block, including the one housing the cafe. His wealth was matched only by his arrogance, and he wielded both like weapons. A spilled coffee could lead to a tirade that left servers trembling. A slow order could prompt a threat to raise the rent. Marla, who had poured her life into the cafe, lived in constant dread of his visits, knowing one wrong move could cost her everything. Clara arrived on a Monday, her first day marked by a nervous energy that made her hands shake as she tied her apron. She was 24, with a face that carried the weight of a life not easily lived. Her brown eyes held a depth that suggested she'd seen more than most her age, and her smile, though rare, was genuine. She'd moved to the city after a string of hardships, her mother's long illness, the loss of their family home, and a job that barely paid enough to keep her afloat. The cafe was her fresh start, a chance to rebuild. Marla had hired her on the spot, drawn to her quiet determination and the way she listened, really listened, when customers spoke. But Clara was unaware of the cafe's unspoken rules, the ones whispered among the staff: keep your head down, don't make eye contact with Victor, and never, ever talk back. That first week, she learned the rhythm of the place, memorizing orders and charming customers with her soft-spoken warmth. She didn't notice the way the room hushed when Victor's sleek black car pulled up outside, or how the other servers exchanged glances, bracing for impact. Victor's arrival was always theatrical. The bell above the door would jangle, and he'd stride in, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He'd take his usual spot by the window, spreading his newspaper like a king unfurling a map of his domain. The staff would scatter, each praying they wouldn't be the one to serve him. That night, the rain-soaked evening of Clara's first encounter with him, the cafe was busy. The hum of conversation mingled with the clink of cups, and Clara was in her element, weaving between tables with a tray of lattes. She didn't see Victor enter, didn't notice the way Marla's face tightened or how the other servers shrank back. When he snapped his fingers, his signature demand for attention, Clara turned, assuming it was just another customer in a hurry. She approached his table, notepad in hand, and offered a polite smile. Victor didn't look up from his phone. "Black coffee, no sugar, and make it quick," he barked, his voice cutting through the cafe's warmth like a blade. Clara nodded, unfazed, and headed to the counter. The trouble began when she returned with his order. The coffee was perfect, steaming and strong, just as he'd asked. But Victor, in a mood as foul as the storm outside, found fault immediately. The cup, he claimed, was chipped, a lie, as Clara knew, because she'd checked it herself. He pushed it back toward her, his voice rising. "Do you think I'm an idiot? You think I'll drink from this garbage?" The cafe fell silent, all eyes on Clara. Marla hovered near the counter, her hands twisting a dish towel, her eyes pleading with Clara to just apologize and walk away. But Clara didn't. Something in her stirred, a spark of defiance born from years of swallowing her pride, of enduring cruelty from those who thought they could buy her silence. She looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful man but a bully hiding behind money. "The cup's fine, sir," she said calmly, her voice steady but firm. "I checked it myself. If you'd like a different one, I can get it, but there's no need to yell." The gasp that rippled through the cafe was audible. Victor's face reddened, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't believe someone had dared to speak back. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "Do you know who I am? I could have you fired with a phone call. I could have this place shut down." The threat hung heavy, and for a moment, Clara's heart pounded. She thought of her mother, of the hospital bills still unpaid, of how badly she needed this job. But she also thought of the years she'd spent shrinking, apologizing for things that weren't her fault, letting people like Victor walk over her because they could. She straightened, her voice unwavering. "I know who you are, Mr. Hargrove, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people like this. Not me, not anyone here." The cafe was a tomb, every patron frozen, every server staring. Marla looked like she might faint. But Clara stood her ground, her eyes locked on Victor's, and in that moment, something shifted. Victor wasn't used to being challenged. His world was built on compliance, on people bending to his will because of his wealth and influence. But Clara's words, simple and unafraid, pierced that armor. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his usual arsenal of insults failing him. For the first time, he looked around and saw the faces of the cafe's patrons, not just watching, but judging. The silence wasn't fear anymore, it was expectation. He stood abruptly, tossing a few bills on the table, and stormed out, the bell jangling furiously behind him. The cafe exhaled, and whispers erupted. Marla rushed to Clara, her face a mix of terror and awe. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, but there was a flicker of admiration in her eyes. Clara didn't answer right away. She felt the weight of every gaze, the mix of shock and respect, and something else, pride. She'd done what no one else had dared. The days that followed were tense. Marla was certain Victor would retaliate, perhaps by raising the rent or worse, evicting the cafe entirely. The staff tiptoed around Clara, some treating her like a hero, others like a ticking bomb. Clara herself was conflicted. She hadn't meant to cause trouble, but she couldn't regret what she'd done. She'd spent too long letting people like Victor dictate her worth, and standing up to him felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Still, she worried about the consequences, about Marla's livelihood, about her own fragile stability. She worked her shifts with a knot in her stomach, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Customers began to talk, though, and the story of the new waitress who'd faced down Victor Hargrove spread. Regulars lingered longer, asking Clara about herself, slipping extra tips into her apron. The cafe felt different, lighter, as if her defiance had broken some invisible chain. Then, a week later, Victor returned. The cafe stilled again, the air heavy with anticipation. Clara was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine, when she saw him. Her heart sank, but she refused to look away. He didn't sit this time, didn't snap his fingers. Instead, he approached the counter, his posture less commanding, his eyes avoiding hers. "Coffee," he muttered, almost inaudibly. Clara poured it, her hands steady, and slid the cup across the counter. He took it without a word and left. It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was something. The cafe buzzed with speculation. Had Clara humbled him? Was he plotting revenge? Marla, ever cautious, warned Clara to be careful, but even she couldn't deny the shift. Victor's power, once absolute, seemed less certain. Over the next few weeks, Clara became a quiet legend. Customers shared her story on social media, and the cafe saw an uptick in visitors, drawn by the tale of the waitress who'd stood up to a millionaire. But for Clara, it wasn't about fame. It was about the small moments, the way Marla started to smile more, the way the other servers stood a little taller, the way the cafe felt like a community again. She began to open up, sharing bits of her own story with her coworkers, the loss of her mother, the struggle to keep going, the hope that had brought her here. They listened, and in their eyes, she saw her own resilience reflected back. Victor still came by, but his visits were quieter, his demands less harsh. Some said he was embarrassed, others thought he was intrigued by Clara's courage. Clara didn't care why. She'd found her voice, and she wasn't giving it back. The real change came one evening, months later, when the cafe was nearly empty. Victor walked in, but this time, he didn't sit by the window. He approached Clara directly, his hands in his pockets, his usual arrogance softened. He didn't order coffee. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "I was wrong. About the cup. About a lot." The words were clumsy, unpracticed, but they were real. Clara blinked, caught off guard, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said simply, "because sometimes that's enough." He left without another word, and the cafe felt lighter than it ever had. Clara didn't know if Victor would change for good, but she knew she had. She'd faced her fears, not just of him but of her own past, and she'd come out stronger. The Corner Brew Cafe wasn't just a job anymore, it was home. This story is for anyone who's ever felt small, who's ever faced a giant and found the courage to stand tall. If Clara's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and bravery, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together, we can inspire a world where everyone finds their voice. Before we end, I have one special request. In the comments below, share a moment when you or someone you know stood up for what was right, no matter how scary it was. Let's celebrate the courage that changes everything.